Well, for today's excitement, I get to go out and visit a tower, which I've certainly not done for quite a while. Find out where in a minute. So we're at Himbleton today, Ring of Four Bells, cast by John Martin in 1675. They've been unringable for a while, but recently been involved in some restoration work, and the Belfry Repair Fund has given a grant, hence my reason for being here today. As part of the advisory panel, just coming to inspect the work that's been done, and hopefully make the payment of the grant.
Do it, Mark. Okay, yeah, you heard that.
That's what we were doing. It's your challenge.
They ring.
Only two. Yeah, only two.
Check out. When you off Monday, is it?
First thing Monday.
So you cycle store.
Oh no.
It's the best workout I've had since we started lockdown.
Try not to die up there because I need my, I'd like my ear defenders back.
Won't do the insurance much good, will it?
No.
Apologise if any of those shots weren't dignified in the slightest, but it was a bit of a squeeze. And here we are. Ring of Four Bells. This might be loud. So that was Himbleton, an interesting tower. I must admit I do like visiting 3 and 4 bell towers. I've visited a fair few in my time. They are very interesting usually because they'll have, for example, like we had today, a complete ring of bells, which is several hundred years old, you know, over 300-year-old. Not had too much done to it in the meantime. Churches are often very interesting as well because they tend to have been more sort of left alone than some other churches which have been significantly rebuilt. And you saw that today in Himbleton, you know, the crest of Queen Elizabeth I, a notable survivor there. So yeah, very interesting. And I wish them well with training up their band and getting the bells ringing regularly again, which would be good. In terms of other things, some of you will be aware we've been doing the ringing room sessions on a Saturday, with the best part of help from me in terms of technology. And I do apologise to all the people that where I've got things wrong. It has been a learning process. So, for example, assuming that today's link would have gone out, was a recurring link from last week, which wasn't, was less than ideal. So apologies to the people who struggled to get in or possibly didn't get in at all to that session. But as we've got the AGM next week, obviously there won't be a ringing room session, and we'll have a quick discussion there just to see what people want to do about ringing room going forward. But you'll have heard the news that ringing will be potentially restarting in a church near you soon. Obviously, before any ringing can recommence, you'll need to agree with the incumbent or other person in charge of the church that it is okay for ringing to recommence. And as part of this, you'll need to prepare the risk assessment and discuss that with them to consider what the risks are and how you propose to mitigate them. Ultimately, remember, it is the clergy who can decide whether ringing can recommence or not. So I strongly recommend working with them to get the risk assessment in place and to re-agree a schedule for ringing restarting. So from this Sunday, ringing is now permitted, but there are several steps that you'll need to put in place before ringing can start. So I strongly recommend that you look at the Central Council guidance. There is a link to that in the description below, and as if by magic it is there on screen now. So have a look at that. It goes into a lot of detail, yes, but it's still very valuable reading. It considers all the various risks that we need to consider and what steps need to be put in place before ringing can restart. So the Central Council guidance is set out in 5 steps, and you'll excuse me if I read those from my screen. So step 1 is to identify the hazards. Step 2, decide who might be harmed and how. Step 3, to evaluate the risks, decide on precautions. Step 4, to record your findings and implement them. And step 5, to review risk assessment and to update that as necessary. So in terms of hazards, we know that the disease is spread through droplets in the air, which can then land on surfaces. And of course, you'll have seen that there are various concerns about how else it might be transferring around. So we need to be mindful of that and how we can minimise the risk. We know, for example, that people can be asymptomatic and therefore you're not aware that you've got the illness, but could still potentially be spreading it around. So these are all things we'll need to take into account. So, for example, maintaining social distancing whilst we're ringing and putting all suitable precautions in place to prevent possible transmission from one person to another should be done before we can ring. Obviously, every tower is different, so we're going to need to consider how best to apply whatever rules need to be put in place by tower. If you are in, for example, in a large ground floor tower with ropes very well spaced apart, then you'll be in a different situation to a small upstairs ringing chamber which has very little ventilation and ropes very close together. Also, we know that the effect varies from person to person, and particularly if you have an underlying medical condition or if you're older, then you might be more at risk. So obviously ringers need to take this into account. So it will be a decision which is down to the individuals as to whether they choose to ring or not. And obviously that will have to be respected. But equally, you won't just be able to have everybody turning up to try and ring on a Sunday. So for the time being, some sort of rota system is probably the best way forwards. Another risk to consider is that the bells haven't been rung for some time, so this will cause some potential issues inside and outside. So before ringing recommences, you'll need to go and arrange to have the bells looked at. check that everything is okay. So, for example, there's been no ingress into the belfry by birds or weather or anything else that might cause damage to the bells. And likewise, check intermediate rooms and the ringing room as well, to make sure that any risks there have been addressed. Also, it will be the first time that bells have been heard in the community for a while. So if you've got close neighbours and particularly loud bells, then you might want to let them know that you'll be starting ringing again, just so they can get a feel for what will be happening from now forwards. So obviously I'm not going to go through all the details about the sorts of things that need to be put in place. That will be very personal to your own tower, and that's where the Central Council's guidance is very helpful. It gives you a checklist of things that you can look through and consider, and some of which may or may not apply. And if they do apply, then consider how they affect your ability to be able to ring safely. Obviously for now it's just going to be ringing for services. So the usual sorts of practices or additional ringing such as visitors or those sorts of things won't be happening. But it's important that you liaise with the church and agree what you will and won't be ringing for. So in terms of safe ringing, the recommendations are that ringers remain at least 1.5 metres apart where bell ropes are next to one another. Obviously if you're in a family unit and you're already living together, then you can be closer than that, but then there must be a gap of 1.5 metres from the person next to you, and that's assuming you're looking forwards and not towards them. In terms of ropes opposite you, they must be at least 2 metres away. Ventilation is another important consideration, so get the tower as well ventilated as possible, and that will help to minimise the risk. As I said, you'll need to look at restricting the number of ringers who can ring. So 1 ringer per rope is the safe option for now. So no bands where people are moving around constantly. So 1 ringer to 1 rope, and then leave a suitable period of time. Recommendation is 72 hours before the bells are rung again. Assuming that you're just ringing for Sunday services, obviously that won't be an issue. Be mindful of things around the tower that people touch and come into contact with. These should be minimised as much as possible. So for example, one person might go in initially and open the doors into the tower so that nobody else then needs to touch the doors. They can then remain open until ringing is completed, and then the original person can close the door. Just things such as this which prevent one point being touched by multiple different people is advisable. Another point is also to clean all points that are touched regularly. As mentioned, this is just an introduction to the sorts of things that need to be considered. So go to the Central Council website for more detail. And as I said, there are various help cards on there to assist you. There is also a template for preparing risk assessments, which prompts you as to all the sorts of things that might need to be considered. Finally, the other thing I've done is spoken with the Worcester diocese themselves. Their advice is that they will be following the Central Council and the Church of England's advice, so they haven't anything separately to offer. But one thing I was asked to sort of talk about, which I can go into in more detail in the future when we talk about maintenance grants, is general condition of belfries in general. Now, usually if there's an active band, I would assume that the tower is well and regularly maintained. But of course, there are churches out there where there is no regular band and things might not be in quite the same position. The diocese is very keen that we do work wherever possible to ensure that belfries are appropriately maintained and indeed secured against things such as bird ingress and weather and so on and so forth, because that benefits the church as a whole. One thing that they have mentioned is that where there has been bird ingress into a tower and there are various droppings or guano all over the place, obviously there is a significant risk to individuals and volunteers if they were to clean that up themselves, such as the risk of silicosis. So their current recommendation is that where there is ingress into a tower and cleaning is required, that this should be undertaken by professional contractors wherever possible, because this is the safest method. They can put things in place to ensure that any risk of that sort of disease being transmitted is minimised. Other than that, that's all there is to report for this particular vlog. I hope you enjoyed the visit to Himbleton earlier, and first look at the guidance about restarting ringing. Hopefully some of you will be able to restart this Sunday or in the weeks to come. But if you're having any issues or you wish to discuss anything, then you're most welcome to get in touch with us, and we'll do the best that we can to assist you. But that's it for this week. Look out for another video coming very soon, which will look at the AGM. That's happening next Saturday. If you're not signed up for that yet, please do so through the Eventbrite. Link to that again in the description below. So yes, there'll be another video on that, which will just explain how it's going to operate and how things such as voting will work. So if I don't see any of you before then, I look very much forward to seeing you on Saturday next week at the virtual AGM. Do take care. Bye. This ladder's creaking a bit under all that lockdown pizza, I tell you. Oh, first time I've done any exercise for about 3 months.
Yeah.